Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on Common Sense, the podcast. Today, we're joined by a true media and marketing legend, Bill Pasha. With over 40 years of experience in media, research, and professional relationship management, Bill has helped countless companies launch, grow, and operate their businesses through marketing and advertising. From working in corporate leadership roles at CBS Radio and Entercom to co-authoring a landmark study on radio's role during the 9/11 crisis, Bill's career has spanned across industries and continents. He now leads the MBMI Companies, a group of 4 firms he founded in 2010. Bill, thank you for being here.
Well, thank you. You should tell them the truth, though. You just were looking for anybody that you could pick off of the street. I happened to be walking by.
It's true.
Let's just be honest with everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I like having random conversations with random people.
This will probably be the most random thing you've ever done.
It's definitely up there. I will say, I actually had to make a post today because I got, and this has never happened in what are we, 110 episodes now? 112. 112 episodes. And I've never gotten so many messages going, okay, we get it. You have all these really interesting people on, but who the hell is Bill Pasha?
Exactly.
And I was like,
I was wondering that.
Maybe I should put something out there to tell people a little bit about who Bill is.
It's funny. A bunch of my friends saw what you had posted because you tagged me.
Yeah.
And they're all going, what? The legend? What the hell is that? It's really nice of you to invite me in. This is not something that I normally do.
Yeah.
Usually I'm on the other side of the camera, which is fine with me. That's the way it's been my whole life. But this is interesting. It's a little bit like trying Vietnamese food for the first time.
Yeah.
Don't really know what you're eating, don't know what you're getting into, but seems like it's going to be okay.
Yeah. When we first met at the Cowboys Club through one of our mutual friends, and we got to sit and talk that night, I had a great time sitting and chatting with you, and I was like, man, we got to find a way to get him on the show when he's not traveling all over the place.
And then you had a week where somebody really famous probably canceled, and you said, hey, you know what? If you don't have anything going on Thursday night, I need you. So Here I am.
Exactly.
It's all good. It's all good.
Well, for people that don't know, can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up, a little bit about your background? Can you give us the little background on yourself?
Yeah. Was born in Detroit. Was a big Lions fan from the time I was a little guy, Tigers fan, Red Wings fan. When I was 8 years old, I had the opportunity to do a radio commercial for Coca-Cola, and I liked it. And shortly thereafter, my dad, who was with what is now Kimberly-Clark Paper, he was with Scott Paper at the time, he was transferred up to a big new pulp and paper mill in Nova Scotia, Canada. And so off we went, and it was a little town, and I thought, I should just ask the radio station if I can go to work there. And they were dumb enough to hire a kid. And by the time I was 13, I was working, and I've been working ever since, doing one thing or another. So it's been a good career. I'm kind of getting to the end of it now, and been some great cities: Boston, Dallas, Oklahoma City, Dallas, Jacksonville, Dallas, Orlando, Washington, Baltimore, New York here. I mean, it's been bing, 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 bing. But this time it's stuck, 21 years. So we've been here for 21 years, my wife Debbie and my son Brian and I, and dog Kylie. And she's 15, so she hasn't been with us the whole time. But it's a sort of a process of getting back to Dallas as fast as I can every time I can. And we founded the companies in late 2010. I left my last employer, which was Entercom, which is now Odyssey, which is I think it's the second largest broadcast company. And I left there in May of 2011 to do what I'm doing. Spent about 6 years doing 250 or 260 days overseas, based in Istanbul, Turkey, and traveling all over Europe. And then along came COVID. Along the way, got into some other things, got into restaurants, got into alcohol marketing, got into a lot of the same kind of research that I did when I was in the broadcast companies. And now here I am with you. That's my whole life in a nutshell.
Man.
Yep.
I don't think anybody's like time warped that quickly and got through that much stuff that quickly.
Yeah, you know.
It's that radio background.
Brevity is wit.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, you have over 40 years of experience in the media industry, including senior roles at CBS, Entercom.
Yeah.
How did you first get into radio in Canada when you did that, and what did you start out doing? Where did that how did that start?
True story. I was in a little town, New Glasgow, Nova Scotia, which is up on the northern shore of Nova Scotia. It's on the Northumberland Strait, right across from Prince Edward Island, where you get all the mussels and lobsters from. And there was a new radio station in town, and I was at the old radio station just visiting. And one of the guys said to me, "Hey, there's this new radio and television thing up on the mountain. You ought to go and see if they'll hire you." And so I walked in, and I told the general manager what I wanted to do. I said, "Look, you know, I'm 13 years old. I can get every kid in junior high school and high school to watch me, to listen to me, whatever. We'll do some programming targeted at them at night." And he thought about it for about 90 seconds and said, "I'll give you a shot." He said, I'll let you do it from 7 until 9 on Wednesday nights. He said, "And if it works out, great, and if it doesn't, it doesn't." So I quit my job at the Dairy Queen, where I was working terribly underaged. And it worked out. And by the time I was a senior, I was kind of running the show there. And it was a lot of fun. My senior year, I walked in one day to go to work at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, and I asked where my boss was, and the general manager said, "Well, he quit." I jokingly said, "You gonna give me the job?" And he said, "Let's talk about that." Went home that night. My dad said, "So what did you do today?" I said, "Well, run the programming up at the station." And he looked at me, he said, "No, you're not." I said, "Yes, I am." And we had a family discussion about that, and I did that all the way through until I graduated from high school. And 2 days after I graduated from high school, I got a call from a major market group in Canada, and they said, "You want to come to work for us?" So I did that while I started college, and shortly thereafter, somebody recruited me from the U.S., and the rest, as they say, is history.
That's amazing. And you have the radio voice. Like, yeah, I mean, like, it's like that instant, like, it reminds me of like Chuck Morgan and like voices like that. Like,
that's so funny you would say that. I used to use that name.
Yeah.
That was my name from 1978 until about 1982. I was Chuck Morgan. And strangely, I get a call one day from a guy in a big market, and he goes, "Man, you are using my name." And I said, "What do you mean I'm using your name?" And so he said, "You know, we need to meet." And we met, and I went to work for him. Later, I hired him. We kind of went back and forth over the years. But most recently, the last time I was on the air, well, for the last several years that I was on the air, I used Bill Morgan because I kept saying my first name by mistake. So I changed from Chuck to Bill, because nobody can figure out how to spell or say Pasha. So
I get it, because it's funny. Chuck Morgan actually is a good friend of one of our old office managers. So it's her husband's dad.
yeah.
So like I know the whole like real name and everything else like that. It's so funny. Like guys always pick a different name.
Well,
some do. I wouldn't say all.
At one time, I was working at 4 different stations, relatively in the same geographical area. So I had my real name. I was Chuck Morgan. I was Dave McBride. I was Charlie Cannon. I have had so many names. Even my wife, just calls me "Hey you" most of the time.
How'd you choose the names? I always find this interesting.
Well, Chuck Morgan, it just sort of rolled off the tongue, and as I recall, maybe one of my bosses said, "Why don't you use this so that people don't know that you're working on two different stations?" Dave McBride, somebody thought it sounded country, and I was doing country. Charlie Cannon, I don't even remember. It was just, hey, go on and pick a name, and that's the way most of the guys do it. Is they just pick something.
I missed out on that.
Yeah,
I've been busy the whole time, my whole radio career.
I was gonna ask you if you went by.
I
was
never
just
had
about to do
any
that.
other name but my nickname, Busy.
That's a great name, though.
I messed.
The marketing campaign for Get Busy is
yeah,
amazing.
it got
You could be
wore
doing
out.
the Night Love Song show, man.
Hey, it happens.
Night Love Songs with Get Busy.
Sponsored by the Cologne of the Day.
It
And
happens.
by.
Trust me. But now I'm mad now. I need to go find another name. Maybe Not So Busy.
You could have had all these aliases all this time.
I know. Oh,
Some of them we don't want to talk about because I think that the FBI may be listening.
trust me.
No
They're tuning
aliases.
in. They're tuning in, no doubt. They're tuning in.
Well, you were also named one of America's top 3 radio programmers by Radio Inc. magazine.
Yeah.
What did that recognition mean to you, and how did that shape your approach to the broadcasting world?
Well, I had to write him a big check. It was.
so this is like a D magazine type
No,
thing?
no. Actually, it was quite an honor. At the time, I was at CBS in Baltimore. I was the corporate VP of programming, but in traveling all over the place. But I had an oldies station, and I had a classic rock station, WQSR and WOCT, as well as 3 others. But they both did really, really well. And one day I walked into work, and my boss said, "Hey, were you aware?" And I said, "No, didn't know that happened." And it was a really nice honor. I also was very pleased many years ago. I was recognized by the old Billboard magazine in kind of a similar situation. Those are the kinds of highlights that are a little bit like, my son has baseball trophies and pictures up on the wall. Nobody took pictures of me playing hockey or basketball when I was a kid. So, the gold records and, the little plaque and the picture of, you and Cher, or you and Mariah Carey or whoever, those are the memories that broadcast guys have.
Yeah.
The holding the Super Bowl trophy, the Lombardi trophy on the field, that kind of stuff that sticks with you. I think that everybody has that. Whatever they do, somewhere along the line, there's been some accomplishment, whether you talk about it or not, that in the back of your mind, that was that moment, and that was one of them.
That's cool. What was radio like during your time in the industry, and how did you witness that medium evolve over the years, especially with like digital media and everything coming into play?
Well, until about yesterday, I was talking like this a lot. It's really changed. I started in the early 70s, and the heyday of top 40 radio was kind of in that 1975 to 1991 area, right? And it was different. I remember very well in Jacksonville, Florida, I was working here at Y95 in Dallas, which is no longer around. It's at 94.9, which became KLTY and other things. But it was owned by a big company, and they transferred me to Jacksonville, Florida, to do a rather legendary radio station, WAPE, the Big Ape. And it served everywhere from Miami all the way up the coast to the Carolinas. And I was, I think, the third program director of the FM there. And I arrived on a Friday night, and I had my rental car, and I wasn't sure that I wanted to go from Dallas to Jacksonville. And my windows were rolled down. It was a summer evening, and I'm driving down First Street, A1A. And at the top of the hour, they had this sound effect. It was an ape call. Like Tarzan, right? 9 o'clock, and this thing hits, and up and down the street, all you could hear was echoing off of buildings from the cars that were all cruising. And that was my Wolfman Jack moment, like out of American Graffiti. And I picked up my phone and I called my wife, and I said, who was back here in Dallas, I said, hey, we're moving to Jacksonville. And she said, why? I said, give me an hour. And at the top of the hour, I held it up out my car window. And she said, what was that? I said, that's how many people listen to this radio station. And it was so powerful to me that I said, I've got to do it. It was one of the best decisions I ever made, taking a step backwards to take a step forwards. And I wasn't there for a very long period of time before Westinghouse hired me to come back to Dallas, and then I went on a whole different journey. But radio has changed a lot, television has changed a lot, media has changed a lot. I mean, imagine thinking that we would be doing this 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Or for me, 10 days ago, really. But
took a little twisting, but
but yeah, it's changed a lot, and it was really go. I mean, some of the stories, some of the people, many of whom you would know their names. They're national personalities. I mean, look at Jimmy Kimmel. Jimmy Kimmel was part of it. Adam Carolla was part of it. Ryan Seacrest, certainly part of that. And you look here locally at all the people that have gone through Dallas, the Kid Cradocks and the Ron Chapmans, and all of these people I consider to have been close friends. And now I'm at that age where some of them aren't with us anymore. And it's not just because of that the industry has changed, but it was an industry that was driven by big personalities, big egos. It was a lot like professional sports. Today, it's much more mechanical, much more sequential, much more business-like, for a lot of reasons. But it was a good time. I mean, a good time was had by all in the 70s and the 80s.
Well, and the music industry's even changed so much. I mean,
Ton.
we were just talking about this last weekend with some good friends of mine that all own bars and restaurants, and the kids and the younger generation of music right now, they don't practice all day long in their garage or a studio and then go around town trying to book gigs so that they get live time on a stage and all this and that. They just work together, they make their music, they put it out on social platforms, and then if they get picked up, it's sink or swim. They get picked up, they go out, now they've never played live together. They've got a very short window that they either figured out, learn how to work when your in-ear piece goes out, your monitor's out, something doesn't sound right, and now you're still trying to entertain people and not miss a beat, and these kids have no experience doing that.
Well, and there are very few careers in the music business anymore.
Yeah.
And if there are, they are often self-made, or they are often financed to the point that they're too big to fail. And I don't take anything away from Taylor Swift. I mean, she's a phenomena. But because of the financing that was behind her when she began, she became too big to fail. On the other hand, there are some tremendous people out there who will never be discovered, who really are anti-discovery. They want to be the alternative to that. They do their own stuff. They publish their own music. And then there are the guys out there looking for these acts. Here in Dallas, there's a young, well, he's not in Dallas anymore. Now he's in Nashville. His name is Mike Easterlin. Mike was, if you recall, years and years ago in Addison, there was an Italian restaurant called Figaro's. Mm-hmm. And it was on Montfort. And I used to go there for pizza more than I care to admit. And he was my pizza waiter. That's what he did. And one day he came up to me and he said, I know a lot about music and I know a lot about radio, and I just want to get into radio. I was working at Y95. And I said, well, kind of need a hook. He said, well, you must be looking for something. I said, well, I am. I said, I'm trying to come up with a marketing promotion for Oscar Mayer wieners. And I got to have it like tomorrow. And I can't come up with anything. Got any bright ideas? And he looked at me and said, buy me a suit and dress me up like a hot dog. I'll be Mr. Weenie. And that's how he got into radio. And he did. He dressed up as Mr. Weenie. As a matter of fact, I put up on Facebook yesterday a picture of Tom Hanks and me from when we were both much younger. And he answered and he said, you know, when I met Tom that day, he said I was wearing the Mr. Weenie costume. Well, he went on to become the CEO of a couple of very, very big labels. His last one was Roadrunner. I mean, it was a pretty good-sized label. And now he's out there. He's decided that he and another fellow who worked for me, Steve Robertson, they have gone out and they are now actively looking for incredible alternative music talent. And they're doing again, they're starting the cycle again from what they did when they were in their 20s. And they're not in their 20s anymore. The music business has become about reinvention, just like so many businesses. The entertainment business and the media business, they really mirror life. You know, people say, you know, art imitates life or life imitates art. Well, they do. They're mirrored. You brought up restaurants a few minutes ago. Our company got into restaurants in 2014. And the way that it happened was that I was working as a consultant for a big broadcast company in Istanbul. And they're one of the largest privately owned broadcast networks in Europe. And the owner, who is a billionaire, he said to me one afternoon on a Friday, "What are you doing this weekend?" I said, "Hanging out." He said, "No, let's get on the airplane. I'm going to Capri, Italy." I said, "For what?" He said, "I'm going to buy Capri Palace, which is one of the finest hospitality locations in the world. Just unbelievable." He doesn't own it anymore, so it's not a plug, but it was marvelous. So we went. And the gentleman who owned it, his name was Tonino. And he said, "Tell me what you do for my friend." So I told him all the things that we did for the radio and television business. He said, "Wow, you know, that's really interesting because all those things apply to the restaurant and hotel business. In fact, in the restaurant business here, we often say they only turn on the radio station once, and if the music's not good, they won't come back," talking about our service and our food. And I laughed and I said, "Well, in the radio business, we always say they only walk into the restaurant once, and if the food sucks, they're out." He said, "Well, we ought to do some business together." And next thing I know, we were in the restaurant business. And we got into it with Salt Bay, the Turkish guy. I've known him since he was young.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we were involved in bringing him to the U.S. and into Dallas. He has now closed Dallas and Los Angeles, Dallas and Las Vegas and Boston, and I think maybe Los Angeles, because he's concentrating on what he owns in Europe, which is significant. But we went from there on to other big companies like Gibson's Restaurant Group, which owns Gibson's Steakhouse, and here in the Colony they own Cortino Italian restaurants, and we've worked with Davio's and Salt Bay and Tandy Thai. You know, the list goes on and on and on and on. All fine restaurants. We owned here as part of the ownership group with much larger owners than we were. We were like, eh. We had a couple of restaurants at the Star that during COVID failed, like a lot of businesses did. I think that the state of Texas and the state of Florida were widely regarded in Europe and by our European owners as being responsible for, oh, if you open your restaurants, you're going to infect the world. Turned out that was not the case. Nonetheless, a lot of restaurants closed during that time. Yeah, a lot of restaurants closed during that time. We were very fortunate because my wife has a wonderful relationship with the Jones family and the Cowboys that we were able to negotiate peace with honor. It was a little bit like trying to get it out of Vietnam. We had to do it with a little bit of dignity. And we were very lucky, and we're very pleased to see that those spaces have now flourished very nicely. But businesses often
I still
mirror
really
each
miss
other.
one of those. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, DeMario?
Yeah. I really miss that place. Like,
DeMario was a fine restaurant, and the executive chef, Luigi Iannaro.
doesn't he have a place up in New York? I think I remember him telling us that.
He did. He is now the head chef for probably one of the finest Mediterranean restaurants in the world, located in Miami. He also owns a pizza place over in the Grapevine Station right downtown called Luigi's Pizza that his wife runs. But Luigi was, and he was one of the founders of Stella downtown, which is a really good restaurant. But he was incomparable. He was a gem in the rough, a diamond in the rough, and we benefited from his abilities for a very long time, and from that entire team. We had just an incredible team there. But that, to me, is really what being successful at business is about. It's about surrounding yourself with incredible people.
Absolutely. So you also co-authored the radio's role in the national crisis.
Yeah.
We did it for 9/11.
Yeah.
How did that project come about, and what did you learn from that experience?
That was probably one of the most interesting things that I've ever done. And when we talk about an accomplished team, I'll fill you in on that. But I sat on an advisory board to what is now Nielsen. It used to be called Arbitron. And I had been the national programmer at large, and then the representative for CBS for many years. And 9/11 occurred, and 9/11 was, it was a transformational event. And it was especially transformational where we were in the epicenter in Washington and Baltimore, because the closer you were to one of those attacks, the greater the impact. And it just happened that the day that happened, we had our company, American Radio Systems, had just merged with CBS. And we sort of came out on top of that merger. And among the other things I was doing, I was then charged with taking over all the CBS stations and what they had for content. And that was the first morning. And I walked into a newsroom, and the news anchor, Tamara Nelson, said to me, "Some fool just flew into the World Trade Center." And I said, "What?" She goes, "Yeah, a little plane." And I'm looking at the screen, and I said, "That's at least a 7.5. I said, "That's a big aircraft from the wingspan." And she said, "Oh, I don't think so." And we're talking. I couldn't believe it. Well, it happened. My mom and dad, in the 40s during the war, my dad was in the military, and they were on their honeymoon in New York when the B-26, I think it was, or B-25, I can't remember which, flew into the Empire State Building in the fog. Well, my mom got some tremendous photos of it, and it looked very similar to what we were seeing at that moment. My mom had long since passed, but I called my dad, who was up in Maine, and he picked up the phone, and I said, "Dad, you watching television?" He said, "What are you talking about? It's 10 to 9 in the morning," or whatever it was. And he said, "I'm not watching television." I said, "Well, some damn fool just flew into the World Trade Center. Looks just like my mom's pictures." He said, "What are you talking about?" He turned it on, and with that, the second plane hit. And he said, "You've got to go." I said, "Yeah, I do." I hung up the phone, and a friend of mine who I later worked with, Tom Hughes, from the Secret Service, he was in Presidential Protective, he called me, and he said, "Where's Deb?" And we had just had our son. He was just months old. I said, "She's working over by the Pentagon." And he said, "Yeah, well, "Are you watching TV?" And I said, "No." He said, "The Pentagon was just hit." He said, "You need to get her out of there." Well, that became, what do we do next with the broadcast facilities? And everybody was scrambling. And I thought, I'm CBS now. I'm the big creepy eye. I can do whatever I need to. So I called my boss, who was the chief operating officer, Dave Perlman, and I said, I want to take Dan Rather, and I want to put him across all the radio group. He said, do it. Well, I was lucky that I did that, and I had permission, because everybody else that did that got in trouble from CBS television, because we were separate divisions. I didn't. But it was at that point that I knew that people would probably not react well in a national emergency. Well, Nielsen, Arbitron at that time, decided that they wanted to do a study and put together some people that kind of had a lot more experience than I did in this sort of thing, and develop a white paper. So they called on Fred Jacobs, who is probably the foremost radio and broadcast and research consultant in the United States, and Ted Rossetti, and his friend Gary Moritz, who invented text to voice and voice to text, and then put it in the public domain. These people are brilliant. Steve Goldstein, who's probably the foremost podcast expert in the world now. All of these people, they put together this group, and they said, we need to figure out what worked and what didn't. And in a very short period of time, in about 4 to 6 weeks, we tried to do that. And we submitted it and published it through Arbitron, and it was a white paper that got onto the president's desk, onto President Bush's desk, and it was a landmark study that is now totally irrelevant because everything has changed since. There is no emergency broadcast system anymore. Now that's the emergency alert system. It's run very differently. There have been a few misfires of it since that time. But it did show us that things can break down, communication can break down, and that when the world doesn't know what's going on, that no matter how much media there is, it's always easier to access your radio than it is to access the television. And television, often because of delays, falls behind. One of our favorite stories looking back, but it was kind of tragic. Dan Rather was on the Horseshoe desk in New York, and he had a chroma key behind him showing the World Trade Centers, and the second building fell behind him, and you could see it. And about 90 seconds later, you see Dan kind of do one of these, and he says, this is just in, and we haven't confirmed it yet, but there are reports that the second tower has now fallen. Well, we just saw it 90 seconds ago, Dan. But delays, things, the way that the producers work. Whereas when it happened on the radio, WCBS AM had somebody sitting out on the street, and they called it like a play-by-play. So we learned that radio still had a significant role when people need a friend. People like Howard Stern, America's shock jock, right? He dropped everything that he was doing. He changed his personality. He became New York's reporter. He walked New York through it. In Baltimore, Steve Rouse, who was the biggest thing since sliced bread in Baltimore, he abandoned everything. He walked people through it. He took calls. He talked to them about their feelings. This happened all over the country. Mason Dixon in Tampa. The list goes on and on. Ron Chapman in Dallas. It goes on and on and on. And if it weren't for those people, people would have been psychologically lost. And it showed the power, the impact, and it also showed where we made a lot of mistakes. So it was one of the most rewarding group efforts in which I've ever been involved. it was truly amazing working with brilliant people like the ones that were on that team. I was just like a fly on the wall that apparently they needed somebody, shorter and fatter than the rest of the guys.
I mean, that's really amazing to think about too, because, TV gets so much more hype and everything else than radio anymore. Like, it almost seems like the dinosaur. It's like pull out your typewriter, but yet it still can have even a bigger impact. Like, I think
In a time of an emergency, think about this. Are you going to watch television in your car? Not likely. Are you going to use your cell phone in your car to get information? No. You're going to turn on your local affiliate, which is why it's so important, in my humble opinion, that the radio business not lose its ability to be live and local, which unfortunately so many of the big companies have gone in a completely different direction, and they've put a lot of focus on digital, and unfortunately it's I think hurt the industry in many ways. Maybe not financially, but certainly when it comes to content. And even television. There are many television stations that have to go to their partners. You have a tornado in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. There are some stations that are going to go to their main station. They're going to flip over to WFAA, or they're going to go to KDFW, whatever it is. They're going to go and get those meteorologists because of their credibility and the resources that they have. Radio has always served to entertain. Television has always served to entertain. But of late, it seems, and certainly research would indicate, that Americans no longer have faith in their media and in its ability to tell them unvarnished truth. Gone are the days of Walter Cronkite. In comes the 24-hour news cycle and appealing to audience segments. I hear people vilify CNN, MSNBC, Fox, and depending on what color of the political fence you're on, you're going to say, well, those guys are bad or these guys are good. But in reality, everybody is just trying to grab an audience. And you look at Fox News, for instance, which outpaces all of the other guys combined. Why is that? For the same reason that Donald Trump won the election. There was a groundswell of people who wanted to identify with what was being said. And we all are very tribal in our nature. Even when it comes to Facebook or Instagram, LinkedIn, we follow people who generally share our views. Some of us try to follow others, but I'm very familiar with people who lost so-called Facebook friends and real life friends to the last 3 election cycles, where I have to be right, so you must be wrong. And if you're wrong, you're bad. Well, that's not what we were built on, and we have to get away from that place.
Yeah, we can't agree to disagree and respect that somebody else feels something differently, or even consider their point of view without it being confrontational.
It's counterproductive to the nation. It's counterproductive to our world standing. And by the way, the stories that we hear from American media versus the stories that we hear overseas, and what we hear from certain people about what's being heard overseas. I just spent 3 weeks in Europe, and before I went, I heard about how wildly disliked we were, and how wildly disliked our leadership was, and how we were doing all sorts of things that people didn't like. Well, I was kind of in the heart of it. I was in Turkey, right next to Iran and Iraq and Syria, right? Not too far from Israel. And I had the opportunity to meet with some pretty heavy hitter financier guys out of London. To a person, every one of them thought that what we here in the United States is generally wrong. That right now, the stature of the United States, what we are doing is on the right course, and that we are more supportive of Europe today than we were 2 months ago or 3 months ago. And I was there when the attacks in Iran took place. And I didn't hear from anybody, oh, you guys are terrible. Well, that's not true. I did hear from one guy whose family still lives in Iran, that he thought that maybe it was a little bit of overkill. But generally speaking, Europeans are more identity conscious with us than they are not. And it's just like you make a trip into Russia. I think that you would find that the people in Russia are much more like the everyday Americans than we would think. And it's just that our governments don't get along. Our ideologies maybe are different. But if I were sitting across the room from Mikhail instead of across the room from you, your viewpoints would probably be very similar. You know, love of family, love of country, belief that we should probably save the planet, belief that everybody should have food on their table. The differences aren't the way that they're being portrayed in North American media right now. And I think that that's really unfortunate.
Why do you think that is?
Because everybody has an audience to appeal to in order to be able to make enough money to keep that network on the air. And many of the people who are responsible for content have agendas. I will tell you that I know of at least one case where an anchor was on the air during one of America's incursions into a foreign country. And I won't say which one it was because then it would be obvious what the company was. But there are a lot of big companies that have owned stock in both broadcasters and in weapons manufacturing. And that anchor got a call in a big market from the CEO of the company. And he said, in a few minutes, you're going to hear that the such and such missiles missed their targets. We don't want to report that. And he said, why not? And he said, because we'd like to have a stock price tomorrow morning, and we made the missiles. That kind of influence on broadcasting is significant. If we don't believe that Ted Turner had significant input into the content of the original CNN, that's just not true. If we don't believe that George Soros has significant input into Odyssey, now that he owns a very big chunk of their debt, if we don't believe that Rupert Murdoch's family had input, or if we don't believe that happens, you know, between Disney and ABC or Paramount and CBS, all of these companies have the public investors that they have to make sure that they keep their stock prices up. And they're all trying to get as many viewers or listeners as they can. Do I really believe that Rush Limbaugh was as aggressive and adamant on some of the stances that he took on the air as he was? No, but he knew how to control an audience. Bravo for him. But all of that plays into the general discontent, much as when you look at Facebook and you see somebody that's just had an incredible vacation And all of a sudden you think, well, why can't I have an incredible vacation like that? Well, you forget that you just took one 3 months ago. Everything is cyclical, but we tend to compare ourselves. We're a nation of people that compare ourselves to somebody else. It's the basis of American exceptionalism. We must be better. And I think that goes down to you and me.
How do you think there's any way that changes for the better? I mean, is that podcasts, the shift to, platforms like that and people feeling a stronger attraction to that? Or, is it a different kind of media? Is it changes within the system? Like, what do you think makes that? You said there probably won't be another, Walter Cronkite 60 Minutes, like where you've got more factual, news reported, but you can't, I don't see how you could ever take away the influence of, corporate sponsors and these people making money.
It's hard. It's very difficult.
Is there anything that you think from all of your experience that could affect that or maybe change that more towards the positive?
Yeah, I see a couple of things. One is another unifying event. You want to be unified? Wait until the day that the alien ships arrive. Watch Independence Day. That kind of a cataclysmic event tends to unite people. Certainly 9/11, for the most part, united us as a country. The Iranian hostage crisis united us as a country. I think here in Texas, with rare exception of people who are extremists, I think that the recent tragedy of the floods, those things tend to unite us. And sooner or later, there is going to be the head of a news division that says we're better off uniting than dividing. And hopefully there will still be consumers. I do believe that for the most part, the podcast growth, as we know it today, unless something changes, I think that we're starting to get to a level plane. And it's pretty clear that the top 1% of podcasts are the ones that support most of the listening. And the issue is, we in broadcasting always complained that there were too many radio stations or too many television stations. Well, now imagine if I'm a consumer, I used to go out and say, I have 14 radio stations in Dallas to have to pick from. But I have 14,000 podcasts. And how many of those are quality? Not everybody has studio lights and good microphones and quality broadcasts and people that have things to talk about. A lot of them are guys talking about how to string guitars, which is great for the guys that string guitars, but that's not a great big consensus play. So, Dana Carvey is going to have a much bigger podcast than I would ever have. And there is nothing I could do to ever reach his level of fame because he comes in with a built-in core. And I think that the battle used to be for eyes, for eyeballs and ears, which was called cume at the time. Then the battle became the time that was engaged. Now I think it's the battle for influence. It's not influencers, it's what you can say that's going to influence me. What influenced a huge number of people to vote the way they did in the last two elections? They were crazy different, and it was all the same people voting. What causes that? It's something that influenced them, either internally or externally. What influences me to buy a Toyota versus a Ford? Something. Why do I want to be green versus not being green? I can't motivate you, only you can motivate you, but I can provide you with all the information to decide what you can decide what motivates you. And we know that that's true because Costco and Best Buy and and Amazon do it to us every day. There's a reason Budweiser spends millions of dollars to do one ad in the Super Bowl. Because they know the NFL has some influence, has some sway. And I think that that's always going to be the case. And the next person that figures out how to influence friends and people they don't know and the general public, they will be able to sort of begin to pull things together. But the easy way, without having to go through it, unfortunately, is a cataclysmic event. You know, the day that there's a gigantic earthquake along the Mississippi River, or Yosemite explodes, cataclysmic event. We'll all be there for each other, I hope.
Oh, man. I could go down this rabbit hole with you all day. I mean, because it's, I mean, what you're saying is absolutely true. I mean, like, even this podcast right here, I mean, you just said it, like, there's 14,000. We've been doing this for 3 years, and, you know, you can have the nice mic, you can have the good camera, you have the good production, you have this, but yeah, to find that influence or to find that traction, and it's like you said with Taylor Swift, you know, like, if you have that backing, but then that also leads you down a certain road. You know, just like, you know, if this show was sponsored, what can I talk about? What can I not? You know, if I don't hit that mark or I don't do this and that, I mean, that's a big thing to overcome.
I believe in the courage of your convictions. If you believe something needs to be said, you say it. And the people who are behind the dollars will either choose to follow you or you'll find a new stream. Yeah. The only time that I can point to where I think that it happened to the detriment of someone more than not. I have a very good friend, Dara Kravitz, who I've known for many years in the music industry, who married Gilbert Gottfried, the crazy, well, let me tell you, comedian. And Gilbert was unafraid, and he believed in the courage of his convictions. And after the terrible tsunami in Japan, he made a couple of choices that some people would say were very bad choices. After 9/11, he made some comedic choices that some people would say were very bad. After 9/11, nothing really happened to him except people said it was too soon, which became part of his act. Oh, too soon? But after the Japanese thing, he was the Aflac duck. Aflac. And he was also Iago for Disney in Aladdin.
Yeah.
And he made a joke which some people thought, a lot of comedians thought, was tremendously funny because sometimes you have to laugh at tragedy. Unfortunately, Aflac, Japanese owned, didn't think so. They pulled it. They put some pressure on Disney, which owns, oh, that's right, ABC. They're a big advertiser. Guess who got fired out of Disney? It was detrimental to his career. If you asked Gilbert, did you make a mistake? He'd go, nope. Because he had the courage of his convictions. Howard Stern, courage of his convictions. Do I always agree with his content choices? No, but he is the most brilliant interviewer in the United States. He is Larry King for another generation. He's Barbara Walters for Jimmy Fallon is becoming that. But Jimmy Fallon tries to keep it so light that he can't ask really probing questions. I would love to see Jimmy Fallon in a serious interview environment because he's a great interviewer. He puts people at ease and he can ask tough questions. I also think that there are some people on network news at present who can do that too. And hopefully they will have that courage without doing things that run them afoul of the legal system, as apparently CBS did in their, now with their settlement with President Trump. Did they do anything wrong in the way they edited? My opinion and Walter Cronkite's may be two different things. I don't think that we would have seen editing the way that it was done under the Cronkite era. But was it right for CBS television? Might have been for their audience. It's just that they got hauled up short in an environment where they had to settle. And unfortunately, they lost a lot of good people over it who had the courage of their conviction and left.
Yeah, and you see this across the board. I mean, like, it's so true because, like, yeah, you see these people with, like, the super strong convictions, whether you agree with them or not.
Right.
They have the largest followings. I mean, like, look at Andrew Tate. Like, people went ballistic, but, like, hundreds of millions of people tune into this dude and, like, follow him. Like, what he says is, like, the golden rule. Or
Joe Rogan.
Yeah, the Paul brothers, I can remember, I don't remember which one it was. I think it was Jake. He filmed that, like, suicide forest in Japan and got crucified over it. And then now him and his brother, I mean, like, they're building immediate conglomerates.
But then you also have people like Charlemagne the God, right? This is a guy who we know where his political views are, but when you listen to him, he's pretty fair and balanced. Joe Rogan, we know where he's coming from, but he can be pretty fair and balanced. Some late night people, some are fair and balanced. Some couldn't be, Bill Maher, some couldn't be further out to the edges. It's just what their audiences dictate. And for some networks, unfortunately, what their anchors have to offer is not where the mainstream American audience is anymore. And you can certainly look at that with MSNBC. MSNBC was a thing when it first launched.
Yeah.
Now it's a niche network. And people will say, well, the opposite of MSNBC is Fox. Except that Fox has 10 times the audience, or whatever the number is. Certainly, if you took MSNBC's audience in prime time, CNN's audience in prime time, all the networks in prime time, add up their viewership, it's almost 2 to 1.
But if you start to
with
look
Fox.
at these networks, and you can definitely tell who likes who and who doesn't like who. Like NBC, you can tell who they don't like, because I'm a Meet the Press junkie.
Yeah.
I watch it every Sunday, and you can just tell who they ain't riding with and who they are. Fox, the same way. For me, and it's just me, but Fox, it's way more entertaining to watch. And I say that because the
that's
first
the way
time
it's
I
built.
seen it, I literally was at I tell the story all the time. I was getting my tires changed or something, and I never watched Fox News, and I was in radio at the time. And so I looked up and it was on, I said, boom. I didn't know what it was. I thought I was watching like a Saturday Night Live skit, like SNL News.
Yep.
And then the lady was like, no, this is Fox. And I'm like, get the bleep out of here. Like, this is really like the way that it was presented and the strong opinions and just the cutthroat commentary. And I was just like, yo, this is like, when coming from radio, we're so censored.
Right.
So it's like they're letting it all hang out. And that's why I said I thought this was not real. And it was just like, but everybody has the right to their opinion.
Right. Well, look at the cast of Gutfeld, which is now the #1 late night show, right? They don't just have political hacks. They have comedians. They have a wrestler. They bring in people from all walks of life. People wearing baseball caps backwards and guys who are wearing suits and ties. It's representative of the population within a certain parameter.
Sounds like our show.
It's
literally. It sounds like common sense.
And by the way, I'll go back to when you said, how does a show like this compete with a Joe Rogan? The first and most important thing you can do, and I say this from professional knowledge, is Don't have people like me. Have people like, that have built-in audiences. Today, to be successful, you have to have guests or opinions that already have a strong base. I recently consulted with a podcast, and the guy who does it is in Oklahoma, and he was asking me about how to grow his listenership. And I said, it's not just how many platforms you can be on. It's about who, because his is a guest format like this, who you can attract. I said, I would not invest another dime in my mechanical. I would invest in somebody that's got a black book. Somebody that can pick up the phone and call, whoever's in the news today and say, hey, I need you. Because if I can say that I have Ozzy Osbourne on, it's a whole lot more engaging than if I say I've got the guy that played down at the Majestic this week. Nothing against the Majestic. It's great. If I could get Randy Bachman from Bachman Terminator Overdrive when he's in town, if I were you, I would do that to talk about music, but I might not get a jingle singer from one of the many jingle production houses. But it's hard. Media is hard. It's not for the faint-hearted. And it's for people who are intentional. It used to be that you could kind of slide. You could do things that were fun and give away a lot of money, and people would be interested in watching or listening. Today, it has to be more intentional. And it has to be more thoughtful. And I love the fact that you have Busy step in, because your perspective from the other side of the camera, as we all look away, your perspective from the other side of the camera is very representative, I would think, of people who are viewing, because you see us with a different eye. Years and years ago, there was a Canadian folk singer. His name was Valdy. Nobody here knows him, and you shouldn't, but if you did. He was kind of an odd guy, but I interviewed him when I was 15 years old, and I said, I was being somewhat self-deprecating, but telling the truth. I said, I don't understand why someone as famous as you would come on this show. And he said, let me tell you something that you should remember for the rest of your life. When those lights are on, I'm famous. This chair is famous. When I get up and walk away, I'm not famous, but the chair is. What does that tell you about my life? He said, you never step on somebody's fingers going up the ladder, because you're going to meet them coming down. And he said, and that's what people in our business forget. He said, and if you remember that always, you're always going to have friends. Not everybody will be your friend, but you'll always have friends. You treat them fairly, they'll always be loyal. And he said, they'll always want to work with you again. The very famous Wolfman Jack, in later years, became a friend of mine. And I made a terrible error with Wolfman one day. I was having to fill in on the air in Orlando, Florida. And he was there to be in a parade. And he was ill. I mean, this man was not well when he came into the studio. And I opened the mic and I said, well, if you're feeling a little bit better later on today, you'll be the Grand Marshal. If you get rid of a little bit of that cold. And I saw him, and he had a look on his face, and I knew I had stepped in it. I didn't know how I had stepped in it, but I had. And as soon as the mic turned off, he said, Bill, if you ever do that to me again, he said, I will come across the desk and I will strangle you. I am not a violent person, but I will strangle you, because the Wolfman, nobody cares if the Wolfman's sick. Nobody cares if the Wolfman's divorced. Nobody cares if the Wolfman's had a bad day. They just want the Wolfman to make them forget about them having the same problems. And I think that that's the magic of what we all do. And it's something I've really lost touch with because I don't do it on a daily basis anymore. I wish I did. It was the best part of my life.
Yeah, I mean, I love your advice, as far as guests go, and we have some plans to make some changes, and I'll definitely be talking to you about this more off air too. I've always looked at this as, I invite people on and I interview with people that I find interesting or that I want to learn something from, and that I think others would gain from hearing their stories and being able to see things maybe that they want to do and maybe not have to make as many, like pit stops along the way, or maybe, hit as many roadblocks. And I don't necessarily want it, I've never really wanted it just to be about like, having somebody that has a huge following or whatnot. Because honestly, the majority of the bigger name guests that I have had on the show, with few exceptions, those aren't the ones that do really well. It's the people like yourself, and like last 2 weeks ago, I had my good friend that's, owns his own plumbing company. He hit our top 3 all time in 1 week. And it's those kind of conversations, but to get the audience, I mean, I totally understand what you're saying there.
Yeah, you've kind of chosen the road less traveled. You are talking about people's journeys, and to me, what I hear when I listen to this podcast is really important, because there are 3 steps for people who are listening to this kind of podcast or viewing this kind of podcast, I think. The first is, if you can provide something that's aspirational to them,
yeah,
and then they become inspired, so it's inspirational, then if they're really into it, it will become transformational. And the first 2, the aspire is why I'm listening. The information that you're providing is really important to my journey, but only I can go into that transformation area. And it doesn't matter if you're a general contractor, or if you're a plumber, or if you're the president of the United States. At some point, you aspired to do what you did. You went out, you found the information, and then you transformed your life to be able to be successful at it. Right now, if you look at the unemployment rates of kids graduating from colleges with degrees, it's like almost 7%, which is way above the national average for what the number is for unemployment. And it's because there are so few entry-level jobs, and the ones that are there, very few of them are jobs that people aspire to. Very few of them on Indeed or on Monster put the information that somebody needs to get excited and go out and transform their lives. There are very few jobs that kids coming out of college can say, I'm inspired and I have the information, and now I'm going to go out and I'm going to make something of it. It's very, very difficult. And unless they just fall into something that they love, it's going to be a difficult journey for these Zers. It's going to be really, really hard. And I like to think that there are still employers out there who look at these people, these young people, these young, extremely well-educated people, although most of them can't handwrite because they were never taught to do it. But you look at these people and they have so much to offer, and very few of us are asking them to offer it. I think that is, I think that that's one of the great letdowns in the country right now. And it's because the people who are in control of many of these positions, they'd rather let AI fill the job right now, go through the resumes, than make a human connection. And that too is unfortunate, and it's going to hurt shareholder value eventually. On this show, you have people who have already been through those 3 stages, and they can talk about those 3 stages. I happened to see a podcast with Tony Hills, the former NFL player, now financial advisor to the Stars, right? He has been through all 3 of those things, and he adds the dynamic of his faith to it. And I found that to be incredibly compelling. Will that ever be a national podcast content? Maybe not, but when you choose the road less traveled, maybe you choose the road that is more beneficial to the people who have found you, and they tell friends and they tell friends. You know, it's not about being the biggest. You don't have to be McDonald's to have the best restaurant.
Yeah. And I think that's definitely true, because you see that once we really started doing the shorts, those are what get the most traction by far, because you, in various shorts, get each one of those steps at some point, and then that's the people that go back and watch the whole show.
Yep.
When it's long format like this.
Yep.
So, well, it sounds like you really loved and thoroughly enjoyed your whole career in radio and broadcasting and everything.
Yep.
What made you, I mean, you talked about the instance where you met the guy and got into the restaurants and stuff, but what made you go, I might like this more, or I'm ready to move on to this as a challenge? Like, where did that come into play for you?
I have always been a student of consumer motivation and behavior. In my last 2 corporate positions, at CBS, I was their corporate vice president of programming and audience measurement. At Entercom, I had a similar position, but the second part of it was about audience behaviors, audience growth as it applied, research. I've always been a real research-oriented guy. I believe that if you ask people what they want, even if they don't know what they want, they can lead you to it. Going to the old Steve Jobs about they didn't know that they needed or wanted the iPhone until they had it. They did know that they needed a better form of immediate personal communication, because moms were in the workforce and they had to communicate with their kids, and it was hard. And big old bag phones weren't the answer. So they had to have something that the next generation was willing to adopt, and they knew that. They just didn't know what it was going to look like. Apple knew the viability and the popularity of great design, and they employed that. When we decided to move out of pure broadcast support into marketing, we started with restaurants, and then, because we have almost never advertised except a couple of little trade things, a couple of trade shows, CEOs started talking to CEOs, because there are certain people out there in certain companies that keep low profiles, but they're sort of secret weapons because they do. And we were recommended by a large website company to a large southeastern alcohol retailer to help provide content for his website. And this is a retailer who has operated for 100 years. even through times when maybe they shouldn't have, right? And we started with a few little projects, and that built into being their off-site marketing department. And it's funny because I generally don't drink alcohol. All of a sudden, I'm managing an account where I'm talking every day to some of the biggest alcohol brands in the nation and saying, you know, that doesn't work for this retailer, and here's why, because it doesn't work for his consumers, and here's why, and we could help you adjust that, and we'll just do it for you. And if you don't like it, don't use it. Well, that resulted in us doing big campaigns for big alcohol brands like High West and 8 Years in the Desert and Nelson's Greenbrier. I was asked to do voiceover for Nelson Greenbrier for a while. And we showed them how to reach consumers that their big research companies and their big ad departments and their big ad agencies hadn't done, because they never asked the questions of the retailer's consumers. And we applied things that were learned by our staff in the broadcast business, because almost everybody in the beginning came out of the broadcast business. Dave Perlman, who was the COO of CBS, joined us right out of the box. Mary Jo McLaughlin, who was a CIO for healthcare all over the country, she joined us. Robert Dedish, who is one of the most interesting people on the planet, brought his brilliant marketing mind. He lives in Slovenia and opened an office for us in Austria. He joined us, and we started going after things. And one day, Robert called me and he said, how would you feel about trying to open up the U.S. market for a dog leash that sells for $62 American retail? I said, a dog leash for $62? He said, let me explain why this will work for consumers, but a narrow consumer group. And it was like the sky opened. Wah! And we saw it, and we went after it, and we got it, and that got us into consumer products. And because of what we did on that research side, they started talking to other people who talked to other people, and we started doing a lot of research. Again, and not just broadcast research, which was great. And we love that. And we love the design part, because it's a creative outlet. And we have created everything from little characters that are mascots for retailers to entire campaigns that involve creating signature sounds and writing in ways that speak to consumers, not to large audiences, to people that are actually going to engage with your product. And we've done it very quietly. We have never approached a restaurant to do business, yet we work with some of the most outstanding restaurants in the country very quietly. We worked with a large entertainment provider based in Florida, who we can't talk about because their little animal has teeth. And at no point did we ever approach them. They approached us, and we couldn't even figure out how and they wouldn't tell us how they found us. Did some really interesting things with them. And that's the way that our business works. And now today, we're heavily involved in helping companies market themselves to get funding. So maybe they're pre-seed, or they're pre-revenue, and they have an interesting product, but they can't get anybody's attention, and they're too small for the big investment companies. Well, we're not licensed to do that, but we are certainly able to market them to people who have money, who are interested in investing. that's become a thing for us. I don't know of anybody else that does that really. We're kind of relationship brokers. We introduce people to people. Just as you introduced me to some of your people here tonight.
Yeah.
And one of them just happens to be a pretty prominent restaurateur.
Yeah.
So yes, I will be calling you and talking to you. But that's the best way to do business. People often say, what brought you to Dallas? I've always wanted to come to Dallas, but when I came here first in 1983, it was because in the 70s, as soon as I became aware of Dallas, I wanted to come here because I knew in my heart that everybody wanted to make a deal. And when I got here as a 22-year-old in 83 or whatever I was, everybody wanted to make a deal. Everybody was an entrepreneur. Everybody had a side hustle. I love people that have side hustles.
Yeah, networking is like the greatest thing in the world, and like just if you can truly build relationships like that and be open to those things, like I mean, I can't think of anything bigger. I mean, like that has what's driven this show for 3 years. I mean, it
Absolutely.
You know, not just that, but my personal business. You know, all of those things. All right, I got to make sure I ask this question because we actually had one of my good friends and somebody that watches the show on here has a question for you. He wants to know, what are your thoughts on the changes the CEO of Red Lobster made, and did he cheapen the brand? And do you feel it will change their current audience or clientele?
You know, what an interesting question. I think that with all the turmoil that is going on in the restaurant industry, you know, Darden buying Chuy's. Darden's one of the biggest companies in the U.S., if not the biggest. And the changes that they made to Chuy's, which have been, you know, people don't realize it. Some of them have been pretty substantial.
Yeah.
I think that Red Lobster had declined to a point that only their core consumer still thought of them in large cities. In small towns, Red Lobster has always been a go-to. You know, you talked about earlier about when I did radio as a young guy. It used to be that if I went into town as a radio consultant and you'd say, so where do you want to go to dinner tonight? The answer was always, let's go to the best place in town. We'll go to Red Lobster. I'm not on the inside, so I don't know if what they're doing is research driven. My guess is you don't get to be the CEO of Red Lobster without having a pretty good handle on who's walking up to your hostess stand every night and being greeted. So I would reserve judgment and wait and see. I think that the fact that they have not had to shut down some key restaurants that many experts were predicting they would have to do. This is like the J.C. Penney story. Somehow or another, they keep finding a way. They keep finding a way.
Yeah.
You know, was Cosmic a mistake for McDonald's? I don't think so. I think it was a proof of concept. And I'm not sure that what we saw as the concept was really the concept. There may be something behind that. I once had a very, very wise man. His name was Bud Paxson, who I worked for. Bud was the founder of Home Shopping Network. And he did it by mistake. He was in a crunch. He needed money. He owned a little tiny AM radio station in St. Petersburg, Florida. He couldn't collect any money, and some guy said, I have some toaster ovens. If you want to take those out of my inventory, you can have them and you can sell those. And he went back to the radio station and he went on the air and started describing them, and he sold them all out. And he went home that night and his wife said, you ought to try to do that on TV. $65 million cash out later or whatever it was. He did okay. And he said to me, he always called me Mr. Pasha. He said, Mr. Pasha, just remember, all the cards are never on the table. And I think that that's maybe what's going on with Red Lobster. So,
yeah, I think it's amazing. I mean, this young CEO is going in there, and I mean, everything he's posting, putting out, I mean, everything's going viral. And
well,
he's,
look at, do you remember Stuckey's?
I don't remember Stuckey's.
Stuckey's used to be the go-to that everybody, they were the Buc-ee's before there was Buc-ee's, it was Stuckey's. Okay. And there was a Stuckey on every road from Boston to the Keys. They were everywhere. They had little pecan logs and snacks and food and clean bathrooms. And they went the way of the dinosaurs until the granddaughter said, you know what? I'm going to buy back that pecan log recipe and I'm going to find a way. And now the Stuckey granddaughter, who has a marvelous online presence, she has turned that company around. They're not doing their own retail at this point, but they are going through other retailers, and they have turned around their revenues in a significant fashion. I think that some young entrepreneurs who have decided to become entrepreneurs for somebody else, they run it like it's their own. They're finding ways, and they're changing the perception of their brands. Bully for them. Boy, wouldn't Burger King like to be able to do that?
Right.
You know, my perception of Burger King right now, I'd like not to be sued, please, is that I don't know if it's going to be a clean restaurant when I walk in or not. Generally speaking, probably, but maybe not. Got to concentrate on it. You know, does International Dairy Queen concentrate on Orange Julius? Yeah, because Warren Buffett's not dumb. You know, he knows how to make things work. And I think that, as I said, you don't get to be the CEO of a major restaurant brand without being pretty darn smart.
Who have been some of the biggest mentors and influences in your life?
Boy, I have been blessed.
Yeah.
Just blessed. Both of my parents were incredible people. My mom was just incredible because she was an incredible mom. My dad was an all-city, all-state, all-American football player. He went to war during the Second World War, ran convoys across the Atlantic, worked until he was way older than I want to when I give it up. And he collected friends. He was probably my greatest mentor. I had a couple of high school coaches that were incredible. Professionally, I can point to Buzz Bennett, who is one of the founders, one of the fathers of Top 40. David Perlman, who was at CBS. Genius, had, I think, the first FM radio football broadcast in the nation. Bud Paxson, certainly. He was an amazing mentor. He had more knowledge about business in his little finger than I'll ever have. I have been extremely fortunate. I mentioned Ted Rossetti earlier. He's another. But all of these guys have been incredibly accomplished. And Wheezy Kramer at Entercom, who is probably one of the greatest driving forces in broadcasting that ever existed, and she did it quietly and without fanfare and without, people showering her with claim that she should have been showered with. Ron Chapman, he was incredible. Joe McCoy at WCBS FM. I've just had so many people around me, and so many inspirational people, even people that work with me. I mentioned Robert Dedish. He's an inspirational guy. we have just been incredibly blessed. Plus, I'm married exceptionally well. I will be celebrating my 40th anniversary in August.
Congratulations.
I think you've met
Yeah,
my
I
wife.
did. I met her the first night we met.
My wife is, I often feel like Jack Kennedy did with Jacqueline. I'm just the person who brought Debbie Pasha to the party.
She definitely can command a room.
She does command a room, and I can't get in or out of a building without somebody stopping her. Me, they couldn't care. Oh, it's just the husband. But that's okay. And she has been integral. I never thought I wanted to work with somebody in my family ever, but not only in my personal life, but in my business life, we would not have the company we have if it weren't for Debbie. So mentor, I don't know, inspiration, yes. And I will also say this, and I say this, dads say this a lot. My son, Brian, has been a baseball player his whole life. And he played at levels that everybody said, you're never going to play at that. And then he would. Got to college, you're not going to play. Oh, yeah, he did. And it still hasn't really ended for him, but he didn't turn pro. But when it came time to know that the jersey was going to be a little bit different, he did that with great aplomb. He fought through injuries. He fought through coaches that said, you're not that guy. And he always was able to do it. All things that I never had enough drive or interest in to have that kind of character. And I think that when you have a family unit like that, that's probably the greatest inspiration and mentorship that you can have. And I am thankful every single day for all of those people.
That's awesome. What advice would you give to people about building and maintaining relationships? Because, I mean, you move around in so many industries that are so fast-paced and changing constantly. What advice would you give to some of these younger generations on that? Because, I mean, you've been able to put yourself in situations where you've been blessed with, I mean, I don't even know how many, I lost count after a while, of how many great mentors and influences there.
It's ridiculous.
What advice would you give to somebody young that's trying to build those kind of relationships? People always say, put yourself in a room and, get into the room and all those things. But I know so many people struggle, and it's one of the top questions we always get.
Get out from behind the keyboard. That's the biggest issue. I know that every person that helps you find jobs tells you, get on Indeed, do the monster thing. Get to know people that have passion for their businesses. Find out why they're passionate and whether or not you share that passion. Look at what you're good at, and can you turn it into a business? Can you turn it into a better business for someone else? Follow up. When you meet somebody, make sure that you let them know that you appreciated their time and whatever they had to say to you. Write a note. I know it is a lost art, but please write a note, don't text. I know that it sounds stupid, but boy, I will tell you right now, there is a young man. He is the son of the lady who runs the Dallas Cowboys cheerleaders. That young man met me one time at a Christmas party. He followed up with a written note to me 3 days later, mailed. He called to be sure that I had received it. He wanted to know, he said to me, I know you like baseball. I used to play baseball. Would you ever be interested? He had not one piece of business he could do with me. I could not benefit him in any way, but he made me feel like the most important guy in the world. And I have recommended him to every one of my friends in the business that he's in, because I think that he is that guy. He is that guy. Here in town, in Dallas, Malcolm Farmer at the Texas Legends, he's that guy. He is the relationship broker extraordinaire. There are so many people that you come across in every city in America who are open and willing to helping you if only you ask. Years ago, a young man that worked with me, his name is Steve Street. Steve Street may be known to you for a couple of reasons. He was the founder of Green Dot credit cards. In fact, when he was a DJ, he told me that he was going to do this, and I laughed at him. I said, never going to work. I have a billion reasons why I was wrong on that I could have made probably. But Steve, I said, Steve, what do you know about starting a credit card? He goes, absolutely nothing. But if I ask politely, people will give me the answers. And he did. And they did. And, sits on the Federal Reserve. A DJ. Very smart DJ, but a DJ who said, I aspire, I'm inspired, I'm going to get the information, and I'm going to transform everything. He transformed credit. Transformed it. Because of his personal drive. Amen.
If you could go back and give your younger self a piece of advice, what would that be?
Do more sales and less content, and probably get an advanced degree. Because as I like to say, when they take the jersey off your back, you have to have something that you can fall back on. And if I had known then what the value would be in real dollars today to that investment back then, I probably would have made it. I probably also would have invested earlier. I mean, financial investment. I would have done that earlier. I had a man that I worked with years ago who was actually the only surviving member of his unit at Normandy. And he told me in 1984, he came to me, he said, you're getting married. I'm going to make one suggestion to you, and you need to do it. I said, what's that? He said, take $150 out of your paycheck every month and invest it in the Exxon employee stock option plan, which is open to the public starting this week. And I said, Walter, where would I get 150 extra dollars? The other day, my financial advisor went through what that would be worth today. I should have done that. And that is what I tell every young person. No matter what you do, find 150 or 200 bucks, put it into something, because it goes by in a blink, and pretty soon you look back on it and you say, gee, I wish I had $20 million instead of 200,000.
Yeah.
So
that's great advice. Have there been any real books that have been very influential for you along the way?
Who Moved My Cheese, I think, was really...
Who Moved My Cheese.
I love that book. And then strangely, it has nothing to do with business, but I think it's one of the most brilliant books I've ever read, and that's New World Order, which was written by Kissinger.
Okay.
It's a tough read, but it's like looking at the Book of Revelations for what's going to happen. If you believe that Kissinger kind of had a clue, you say, oh, wow. And then you look at what he said was going to happen even in the last couple of years, and it has all been exactly right. So, yeah, I think that there are some pretty good books out there. And most people in business don't read business books, which is really... Salespeople don't read sales books and have not taken sales courses.
Suggest some of the book that me and you both just read again, because it's the same thing about, even though this book was written in the 1920s and 30s, it's exactly relevant to today.
Yeah, Outwitting the Devil by Napoleon Hill.
Have you heard of that?
I like that.
It is absolutely one of the best books I've ever read. I haven't read it yet. I now own it, but I have listened to that book from start to finish on Audible at least 4 times now.
Oh yeah, you good.
And I just learned of this book, and I thought I had most of Napoleon Hill's stuff prior to about a month ago.
It was suggested to me by a friend, and everybody has the basics, Think and Grow Rich, and
Yep.
all those things like that, which is the book that started me on entrepreneurship after radio. But when this one came about, and just the relevancy of how can something that was written Jiminy Christmas almost 100 years ago be relevant today, but what does that really say about humankind and everything? Do things change, or do they just
It's the
come back
same
around?
thing that I've taught. There's a book that Jeffrey Gitomer talked about. It was a sales guy. I was reading a bunch of his sales books, and he talked about how this was one of the most influential books on him, and it was, I believe this is the correct title. It's America's 12 Master Salesmen. Mm-hmm. It's a super rare book. It took me forever to find an old copy of it. I think it was last published in like, I'm going to say the 30s. It was something that was put out by like Reader's Digest. It's men and women that were like amazing leaders. Some you've heard of, some you've probably not heard of. And you think about how much the world has changed in, we'll call it 100 years since this book came out. Every chapter that's on one of these people, there are business lessons and things that are absolutely still core essentials and absolutely applicable today.
No question. When I was 13 or 14, I was working at Dairy Queen. I worked for a guy named Harry Douglas, and Harry was an innovator. He really was. His restaurant was the one that invented the Blizzard. And he said to me, before you can work the counter, I need you to read a book. How to Win Friends and Influence People.
Dale Carnegie.
And you know what? It's as true today as it was when it was written long before I was born.
Absolutely.
People just want to be treated well.
Yeah. And Will, you're absolutely right. Networking is definitely the most underutilized method of growth.
And I'm not good at it. I am inherently an introvert. I know you're going to say that's not true, but it is.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm
My
calling bullshit on
wife
this.
she's the networker. I just piggyback off of her. I find it very difficult. I cannot walk into a room and, hey, how are you? I'm not good at that. I can push myself through it, but I am not good at it. I've recognized that as being one of my shortcomings. I try to overcome it, as you do when you're an entrepreneur. But put me behind a mic, I'm good. But, let me read the news, I'm fine. But don't just put me in a room with people I don't know. Chances are I still won't know them at the end of the day, unless they introduce themselves to me. You probably introduced yourself to me. I don't recall. I probably did not walk up to you.
I'm playing this back in my head right now.
I'm almost certain that that's true.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think Tony did lean over and introduce us. Like, I had already met your wife, and Tony, I think, was like, hey, you've got to meet my friend Bill. And he introduced us. But I still would have never have guessed that, because the minute we started talking, I mean, we sat and talked for, at least a half an hour while we were sitting there. And I was finally like, all right, I got to go. Like, I'm way past what I needed to be here tonight. But yeah, I would have never have guessed that.
Yeah, it's absolutely true. I'm just not. I am not a social butterfly in any way, shape, or form. That would be Mrs. Pasha.
Well, and it's funny you say that too, because I think about it, like, people ask me all the time, and there's people that I try to get on the show. This was really easy for me, and I'd never done anything like this. I had to go take speaking courses to do public speaking and get over all that. But I never thought once about, and we started off being live from day one. And I could have cared less that that camera was there. I didn't think about it. Being here with the mic, like it just didn't matter. And I was never really worried about what I said. Like other people were more worried for me and telling me like, you know, aren't you worried about like losing clients, you know, that don't believe with what you're saying? And, you know, then I had some guests on that were a little controversial and people would ask me questions and stuff. And they're like, well, what if they assume that your opinion's theirs? I was like, just because I give them a microphone and the freedom to express their thoughts and their, you know, opinions, like, I mean, to me, like, we need more of that. Like, I would hope that that's showing that, you know, again, we talked about this earlier of like, we need to get back to the days where people can be civil and learn from each other and agree to disagree and have conversations and I mean legitimately have the conversation and not take it to a level where it's hostile and still not agree at the end of the day, but really hear each other out. And maybe you learned something, maybe you didn't, maybe you still disagree, but like, we need more of that instead of just like my way or the highway and the super confrontational stuff.
Absolutely agree. And you know, you've asked me a lot of questions about me, but I would be really interested in knowing what's the next step for this show? What are you going to do next? Yeah, okay.
I'm torn on this in a lot of different ways. The first thing that I think is going to happen in the very near future is I don't know that we're going to continue to go live constantly. I think there's more benefit to bring on a more variety of guests and stuff. If it's pre-recorded, it also gives us time for editing. We can, you know, we can tailor it a little bit more to really be a better production at the end of the day.
Planned spontaneity is a lot better than spontaneity usually.
I agree. And I'm the one that has fought this the hardest probably. Biz has told me to do this for, I don't know, 2.5 years. Oh,
way to go, Biz.
Yeah, you know. But, you know, I feel very drawn to, you know, we do have a bunch of very loyal listeners, and a lot of them really do enjoy being on here and being a part of the live show and asking questions. So I'm trying to come up with some ways where maybe I can still make that happen, and maybe it's, you know, maybe it's through the, you know, the people that do want to subscribe, and maybe I put out ahead of time who the guests will be and give those people that are paying and following to do the show like a chance to ask a question ahead of time, and then maybe their question gets asked. I don't know. I'm playing around with a lot of that stuff. I am very interested to later on have a conversation with you. I'll go ahead and talk about it a little bit. I don't want to dive off super deep into it, but everybody's heard me talk about it. I have another podcast in the works, and it's really one of my passion projects. I'm a big music buff. Good. I love acoustic music. I collect rare, hard to find acoustic stuff. I was of the generation that grew up with VH1 behind the scenes and MTV Unplugged, and I fell in love with that. You know, the whole concept of, you know, my parents walking in and hearing me play a Nirvana tape and going, oh my God, what are you listening to? And they could not see. And then they see me watching the video, you know, Teen Spirit on MTV, and they're bashing and breaking their instruments, and it's this whole underground alternative scene that they don't relate to at all, and they're like, oh my God, this is not music. Like, what are you listening to? And then Kurt Cobain and Nirvana go out and do MTV Unplugged, and it's one of the highest selling of all time, and strip it down like they did when they were first probably coming up with the songs, and everything's acoustic and raw, and then everybody could see the beauty in Nirvana. Like, maybe it wasn't the full thing where it's just amplified and all in your face, and I've fallen in love with that concept. So I have been working in the background on this for a long time, and it's called Beyond the Amplifiers, and I plan to do a couple different things with it. And the struggle lately has been that the music scene is so so bad right now and changing so fast that, you know, it's one of those things that I think to do it right and to really make it successful is going to have to come out the gates really strong. I mean, you got to have, just like you were saying, polarizing guests. Like, all right, I've got to book Metallica to play Unplugged. You know, it's got to be bigger names, like, and local artists. Like, yeah, there's some of that you can do, but there's not a lot, and there's not a lot of upcoming and new artists that are actually gigging and playing in places. And then where do you do such an acoustic show at? And then putting it out on the platform and people to be able to tune in and watch it live and all of this. So there's a lot of pieces of that I'm trying to still work through.
Yeah, there are a lot of pieces to that.
There's a lot of pieces.
It's a lot tougher than you think. Yeah.
It absolutely is, but you know, that's a passion project. But aside from that, with Common Sense, I do think I'm going to niche it down a little bit more, and there'll be some changes coming in that. And you kind of hit the nail on the head somewhat with narrowing it down. You know, even if it's the format I'm doing, you know, there's those 3 parts that our type of listeners looking for, and really trying to continue to hone that down. I feel like the questions have always gotten better, you know, month to month to month, and I now have learned so much in 3 years of directing a conversation and to ask the questions better, to, you know, all these things that just continue to, you know, play in your head as you get more experience doing it.
Yeah, you know, again, 3 stages: music discovery,
Yeah.
engagement, and embracing it. And, you know, those are 3 very different stages with 3 different motivations.
Yeah.
And you're lucky because you'll be able to explore all of them, sometimes together, sometimes individually. And you'll be able to explore some really cool stories. There are a lot of great stories in the music business,
Yeah.
some of which people can't tell because there's still a statute of limitations. But, you know, others that you can.
Well, there's a thing with that too that we're planning on doing, and I already have this kind of lined up. So that's kind of where do I start with some of it, or does it have to come out at once? You know, like I battle these things of because this has been an idea that started when I was like 18, and it's morphed and evolved and through discovering podcasts and all this other stuff. But we're even going to do like a brilliant man up here that's really involved in the music scene and is a big songwriter and everything. He gave me this idea of like, hey, why don't you also do this as part of your show? And because of my connections to the music industry from when I was a part of that, when everybody else was in college, you know, I know a lot of these local big name artists and stuff like that from the late 90s, early 2000s. And we're going to take like 2 of these, like either opposing or maybe different style guys, and we're going to kind of do a live interactive Song 101. And each guy comes to the table with an idea that I kind of moderate, and they're going to go through live and write a song. Not anything they've started, nothing that's been already worked through, but maybe they have an idea for a song title, or just the chorus, or maybe it's just a verse. I don't know. Maybe it's an idea of what the song's going to be about. And you're going to get to watch 2 brilliant minds that do this regularly create a song and even give some feedback and be like, oh, we really like this. Then whatever they do with that, if they have a song at the end of the day, you know, there's a whole song written, and people can see that whole process. And I think that would be really entertaining, because I've sat on those tour buses and in the rehearsal rooms when that's happening, and watching the guy just pick up the acoustic guitar and the other guy's off in the corner and he's got this thing in his head, and then they start collabing, and you literally watch that organically come together in a matter of minutes usually. So that's something else I'd like to capture in that.
I think that's great. So turn it up. Make sure you have a really good system to listen to it on. And remember, it was his idea. Don't do it first.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Bill, I want to be super cognizant of your time. I know we started a little late, and now I've kept you late. We like to.
I have anywhere to be.
You probably have lots of places to be. But I want to first and foremost really thank you for coming and sharing this with us. Like, I've really enjoyed even getting to know you even more tonight and having this conversation with you.
Too.
We like to end every show with two things.
Do I have to sing?
No.
Okay, good.
You can if you want.
No, that's why I asked.
All right. So, if you got to leave your son with one piece of advice, what would that piece of advice be?
Wear your sunscreen.
No one has ever said that.
Actually, truly, I think that it is find your passion, pursue it, because life is gone in a blink.
Right on. And then this is the fun little segment we like to throw in at the end, because the show is called Common Sense. We like to do a little segment called Give Us Your 2 cents. So this is your mic, your chance to whatever we didn't talk about or whatever's on your mind.
About anything in particular?
It's your mic. It's your own segment.
Gosh, I really think that I really think that they need to settle down on who they're choosing for judges on The Voice. I mean, that would be nice. I mean, and Adam, why do you keep changing the color of your hair? I don't understand that. And gosh, I wish Kelly Clarkson would just pick a weight. But other than that, I can't think of another thing. But thank you so much for having me. It was great. And Biz, thank you so much for kicking in.
You are very welcome. And I will say, for the last 2 questions, those have been the most unique responses we've had in 3 years.
Absolutely.
And they're greatly appreciated.
No one has done that yet. And I hope my older brother's watching this, because he just bashed Adam. So I was asking him, he goes to this big conference every year, and they always have some big music act. He works for a really large company. And I asked him, I was like, so who's coming this year? He's like, I don't even care. I didn't even look, because last year it was so bad. I was, who was it last year? I mean, they've had Lady Gaga, all this stuff, Coldplay. And I'm like, it couldn't have been that bad, right? And he's like, no. Most of our companies, it's largely middle-aged men. Yeah. He's like, probably like 70%. And he goes, they had Maroon 5. I'm like, well, Adam's amazing. He's a great singer. I mean, he's so musically talented. He goes, yeah, but first of all, he sounded terrible that night. Like, I don't know if it's a sound guy, what. Like, he didn't sound like you would have thought. I was like, okay. I was like, well, what was the big deal? He was like, you're playing in front of a bunch of men. Was it really necessary to walk around on stage half naked, like with no shirt on and all this all night, showing everybody your tattoos? I was like, that's kind of his thing. Like, you didn't expect that? But yeah, that totally rubbed him the wrong way. So
now I need 2 cents from you.
Yeah.
Uh-oh.
Here it is. The Eagles today, cover band or the Eagles?
How many are left of the original band?
I'll still go Eagles.
Wow. Okay.
I'll still go Eagles. I mean,
would you pay $1,500 to see him at the Sphere?
No, all right. I still take issue with certain people in that band on personal principles, but as musicians, I absolutely think they are, some absolutely brilliant musicians across the board. Milo is one of the most amazing fiddle guys I've ever seen in my life. I have seen the Eagles before. They're phenomenal. But yeah, $1,500 to see them in Vegas. Yeah, I don't know. Probably not. But I have seen them, so maybe that alters my. But we did pay something outrageous to see them at like American Airlines years ago. I want to say like $400 or $500 a ticket.
It's expensive to go to concerts.
Yeah.
And football games.
Absolutely.
And anything, really.
Yeah, everything's expensive as shit now.
Yeah. Thanks so much. I really do appreciate it.
Absolutely, man. Hopefully we'll get to have you on again sometime.
Thanks,
and
dude.
do it again. You guys, thank you for joining us tonight. Quick little reminder, Next week will be a Tuesday show because I have an event on Thursday. But hope you guys will join us again. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. Peace.